Red Death in the deep forests. Vikir knew that the religiously holy Quo Vadis clan and the poison-wielding Leviathan clan didn't have a good relationship for a long time. So, he anticipated that a huge fight would soon break out between them because of this incident. Vikir smirked and declared that his preparations were now complete. Vikir then remarked that it was almost time for the holy water to be poured, so he decided to pay Saintess Dollars a visit. Moonlight bathed the grand mansion, casting an ethereal glow on the scene. Outside, a large crowd had amassed, all yearning for a glimpse of the rumored Saintess residing within. The voices of the people melded together, expressing their desires to meet the Saintess and seek her miraculous healing. Their pleas echoed through the still night, reaching the mansion's door where the Saintess was rumored to be present. Responding to the clamor, a voice resonated from behind the door, questioning the lateness of their visit. The people recognized it as the Saintess's voice, causing a wave of excitement to ripple through the crowd. Individuals from the gathering stepped forward one by one, highlighting their prestigious backgrounds and substantial wealth in an attempt to persuade the Saintess to open her doors. A young man presented himself as the Lord of the Doorsmile region, emphasizing his status as the eldest son of the Jonathan clan, known for dispatching soldiers. He also mentioned his position as the son-in-law of the Alphonse clan. Following him, another young man boasted about his role as the overseer of the Ipsen Guild Association, responsible for managing the bourgeois family's exports. Additionally, he revealed his honorable service as a knight under Count Bastontrier Le Baskerville for 2 years. Lastly, an older man, seeking treatment, proposed a generous reward, including the entirety of his productive granary, a beachfront villa on the southern shore, and exclusive carriages. However, the Saintess remained unmoved, expressing her doubts about whether their status or wealth alone warranted her opening the gates at such an hour. With her firm refusal, she urged the crowd to depart. The people, understanding her decision, dispersed quietly. Yet, amid the thinning crowd, one figure remained rooted in place, separating himself from the others. It was Vikir, donning a crow mask, an enigmatic presence in the moonlit night. Lost in thought, Vikir remembered that before he had regressed, he had often seen the Saintess on the front lines of the battlefield. He had seen her covered in blood, desperately tending to the injured. Her once white clothes were now stained in crimson, and her divine powers continued to glow. The Saintess he knew detested the allure of money and power. Just then, the Saintess's voice reached him, inquiring about his identity and purpose. Vikir knelt outside the door and replied that he was just a young lamb who had lost his way. Silence followed his words, but he maintained his position outside the door. After a while, the door opened, and a brilliant golden radiance spilled out. Bathed in this light, Vikir heard the Saintess invite him inside. As he entered, he found the entire hall bathed in bright lights, with an indoor water fountain featuring an angelic statue at its center. The Saintess's voice emanated from the fountain, asking how he had lost his way. Vikir questioned himself if the Saintess was not going to personally meet him, but upon considering the situation, he realized that she had no reason to meet someone dressed as suspiciously as he was. Placing a leather pouch on the fountain's edge, he explained his purpose. He had come to report the epidemic spreading in the slums and had brought water from their well, contaminated with wicked energy. He believed that if she possessed divinity, she could detect this malevolence. The statue remained silent for a moment, and then, with a sudden exclamation, the Saintess accused him of lying. Footsteps echoed through the chamber as night started to pour into the room, assembling on a higher level than where Vikir stood. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The leader of the knights observed that Vikir's speech was rather aggressive for a young lamb who had lost its way, and in a cold tone, he inquired about his identity. Vikir remained silent, but in his thoughts, he recognized him as Pietro Quo Vadis, an old comrade from his previous life. Pietro was a man known for his unwavering dedication to justice, even if it meant being more ruthless than demons. The interrogation techniques he had used on 7 young masters in the underdog city were taught to him by Pietro. Vikir finally spoke, expressing his surprise at seeing him here. Pietro, however, appeared perplexed by this comment. He acknowledged hearing about Vikir's report on the epidemic but found his attire suspicious. He demanded that Vikir remove his mask and show some courtesy before meeting the Saintess. However, Vikir was unwilling to remove his gas mask and turned to leave, stating that his task of reporting was complete and that he would take his leave. As he moved to depart, an object flew toward him, narrowly grazing his mask. Pietro held an open book in his hand and declared that he couldn't allow a suspicious person to leave. Vikir realized that the object Pietro had attacked him with was a page from a book infused with divine power. He couldn't help but marvel at Pietro's use of such unconventional weapons. Pietro leaped down from the upper floor and landed directly in front of him. He accused Vikir of carrying water pouches tainted with wicked energy, implying that he might be responsible for spreading the epidemic. Vikir swiftly defended himself, questioning why he would come to report it if he were the culprit. Pietro, however, remained skeptical, proposing that it could be a tactic to lure the saintess out. In his thoughts, Vikir admitted that every word Pietro said was true. Then, Pietro initiated an attack, using the pages from his book as weapons, aiming to apprehend him for further questioning. However, Vikir was not one to be easily subdued. He swiftly started dodging the incoming attacks by jumping from one position to another. He considered using his aura but hesitated, fearing that it might reveal his identity as a Baskerville. Just then, he found an opportunity and used the wall to propel himself downward towards him. He then unleashed a powerful kick, but Pietro swiftly countered by raising his arm guard, which was topped with his book, to block the attack. The force of his kick caused the ground beneath Pietro to crack. Pietro looked at him with amazement. It felt like a boulder had fallen on top of him. He couldn't imagine how such strength was coming from Vikir's small physique. Vikir wasted no time and used his other leg to push him back and propel himself away. He reflected on a skill he had acquired 2 years ago after defeating the ox bear, the 600 kg stability, which he had just employed for the first time, and found it to be quite effective. As soon as Vikir landed back on the ground, he charged straight at Pietro, unleashing a flurry of rapid punches. Pietro used his book as a shield to block the assault, but he soon realized that the situation was turning against him. Vikir, no longer holding back, employed the Cerberus flame, launching a fiery attack at him. The flames quickly caught onto the book, spreading to Pietro's hands. Agonized, he threw the burning book away and plunged his hands into the flowing water of the fountain, attempting to ease the searing pain. Vikir calmly asked if he wanted to continue, but Pietro was unable to give an answer. However, in the next moment, Pietro charged straight at Vikir and accused him of being irreligious for using sorcery. He declared that he couldn't let him go. In response, Vikir swiftly kicked the burning book that Pietro had thrown, sending it flying straight at his face. Pietro was taken aback as his vision was momentarily blocked by the book. Seizing the opportunity, Vikir capitalized on the momentum and delivered a powerful, full-force punch straight to his chest. The impact was formidable, causing cracks to appear in his armor. Moments later, he was sent hurtling back, his armor shattered into pieces as he crashed into the fountain statue. Breaking past the fountain, he slammed into the wall, coughing up blood. The knights standing above were in a state of utter disbelief, struggling to comprehend the unfolding scene. One of them questioned whether they were merely dreaming, while another insisted that it was impossible for Sir Pietro to have been defeated. Amidst the confusion, a few knights quickly surrounded Pietro, their shields and swords raised, prepared to face Vikir. Vikir, reluctant to escalate the confrontation further, addressed the knights, indicating his willingness to continue if they desired. However, his words were cut short by the arrival of the saintess, who commanded everyone to stop. She took a moment to observe Vikir before addressing him directly, inquiring if he was the lost young lamb. Vikir recognized her as Saintess Dolores and confirmed his identity. The saintess remarked that he resembled more of a puppy than a lamb, a small puppy covered in injuries. A knight interjected, proclaiming that Vikir was not a puppy but a blood-crazed wolf. However, the saintess disregarded the comment and instructed him to bring tea. Confused by the request, the knight sought clarification, only to be ignored as the saintess started walking away. Her gaze remained fixed on Vikir as she expressed her intention to speak with him. Vikir and saintess sat facing each other at a tea table. Pietro stood behind saintess, his gaze fixed on him. Vikir estimated her age to be around 16 and recalled her full name, Saintess Dolores Lun Quo Vadis. Vikir remembered that during the war against demons, she treated patients on the front lines and saved countless lives. She was a living example of benevolence. During the time of ruin, every martial master who encountered her, including himself, held her in high regard. The saintess broke the silence and expressed her recent stress, catching Vikir off guard. With a questioning gaze, he listened as she revealed that she had been enrolled in the Imperial Academy, Colosseo. Currently, it was the holidays, so she was taking a break from her studies and handling family affairs. Vikir was taken aback, wondering why they were suddenly engaged in such mundane conversation. Saintess, looking out of the window, described the relentless demands on her time, with nobles and merchants seeking her services at all hours. She lamented that the cases she encountered were often related to the aftermath of narcotics or sexually transmitted infections, with no severe illnesses to speak of. Taking a sip of her tea, she mused about the irony of how people often failed to see the broader principles of justice, righteousness, benevolence, and equality, instead focusing on immediate needs. In response, Vikir stated, "Theology is essentially the process of understanding humans, so it's inevitable." Saintess looked at him and stated the source of the verse, the Old Testament, Asmoser, chapter 6, verse 9, expressing surprise that someone who knows such ancient passages exists. Vikir remained silent for a moment and then turned the conversation into a pressing matter. He revealed the existence of an epidemic that had taken hold in the slums of St. Mecca. Saintess asked if the information was accurate, and Vikir presented a pouch containing the infected water that he personally collected from a well in the slums. Saintess gazed at him intently and inquired whether he was truly not involved in the incident. Vikir, with confidence, questioned whether he would have come forward on his own if he were involved. Nonetheless, he acknowledged that suspicion might be unavoidable, so he started contemplating his next move. As Vikir began to raise his hand, Pietro, alert to his movement, swiftly positioned himself in front of the Saintess, urgently instructing her to take cover. However, the situation took an unexpected turn. Vikir extended his hand, which was enveloped in a radiant golden glow. He then declared that he disliked harming innocent people, especially since this place was his hometown. Saintess and Pietro were visibly astonished by this, and Saintess recognized that Vikir was using divine power. Saintess couldn't contain her astonishment and questioned if he was a believer of Lun. Vikir, maintaining his composure, asked if they were willing to listen to him now. He recounted witnessing suspicious individuals pouring liquid from a glass bottle into the slum's waters, unequivocally identifying them as the culprits behind the epidemic. Saintess, visibly taken aback by his revelations, queried about the motives of the perpetrators. Vikir posited that the criminals likely sought the downfall of the Quo Vadis family and the advantages that would come with it. Retrieving a map, he laid it out on the table, pointing to 2 locations as he explained his reasoning. He singled out the deadly and poisonous Leviathan clan and the conglomerate bourgeois family as the primary beneficiaries of the epidemic. Vikir explained how the Leviathan clan would use the epidemic as an opportunity to collect samples from numerous patients for research purposes. Moreover, once the divine Quo Vadis family falls, it would work in favor of the Leviathan family, who are hostile toward them. Regarding the bourgeois family, he explained that valuables don't disappear during an epidemic. With the demise of laborers, landowners will face bankruptcy. Amid the presence of vacant fields, factories, and stores, the bourgeois family will diversify their real estate holdings and venture into a new business. In his mind, the culprits behind the spreading of the Red Death were undoubtedly the despicable Leviathan group, while the cooperative bourgeois merchants were complicit in the scheme for their own gains. The natives of the deep forests were being used as convenient scapegoats, allowing both factions to benefit from their devious plan. After outlining his hypothesis, he noticed the stunned expressions of Pietro and Saintess as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. Saintess's mind raced with the plausibility of his explanations. She couldn't help but wonder how someone who could predict future incidents so accurately could exist. Unable to contain her curiosity, she inquired, "Just who on earth are you?" Vikir responded cryptically, suggesting they could call him Night Bloodhound. Saintess found the name slightly ominous, and Pietro remarked that it was blasphemous to choose a name so fitting to his attire. She acknowledged that everything that Night Hound had said was quite possible. She made a decision and told Pietro that they needed to visit the slums to investigate the epidemic further and report the situation to her father. Pietro readily agreed to her plan. Vikir observed the Saintess's resolve and thought to himself that meeting her was fortunate, knowing that things would now progress swiftly. Meanwhile, Saintess looked at Vikir and wondered why the man who had defeated the unrivaled Sir Pietro and the holy knights looked so small and pitiful. She observed him and detected the semblance of a beast exuding from his soul, the scent of blood, oil, and steel, along with violence and pent-up anger, the color of hatred. But deep within this whirlpool of numerous emotions lies immense sadness. Lost in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions, Saintess couldn't help but question the true nature of this enigmatic figure. In the church building within the slum area, the sisters greeted Saintess with relief as she arrived. One of the sisters, tears in her eyes, implored Saintess to save them from the horrific epidemic that had struck their community. Saintess was visibly shocked as she gazed upon the epidemic-infected individuals lying before her. She couldn't help but acknowledge the accuracy of Night Bloodhound's information. Vikir observed the afflicted people and felt a sense of regret for involving civilians due to the lack of time, although he was grateful that there were no children among them. He wondered if the fear he had instilled in the children at the well had worked to protect them. Realizing that they were in the initial stages of the disease, He had no choice but to leave the rest to Saintess. She, in turn, addressed the patients with compassion, assuring them that God's most sublime love would heal them all. She began to pray, invoking the light of her life and the fire of her soul. She beseeched her sins and her soul to bear witness to the pitiful congregation that had gathered there. A tear rolled down her cheek, and as it met the ground, a golden radiance emanated from her, spreading through the room and eventually seeping out through the windows and doors of the church. The miraculous power of the Saintess manifested as an old man who had been panting heavily, with red marks covering his body. Suddenly, he experienced a stabilization in his breathing, and the red marks began to disappear. The sisters were astonished and joyfully exclaimed that he had been healed. Multiple others were also experiencing the same miraculous recovery. They showered the Saintess with gratitude. Meanwhile, Vikir watched the Saintess with an intent gaze and recognized the incredible power she possessed. He realized the need to bring the miracle of holy water to the forest. Saintess Dollars perched upon a study table, the gentle glow of a lit candle casting an ethereal light around her. Her focused gaze was fixated on a map before her, her hand deftly marking certain areas with precise intention. Contemplation consumed her as she acknowledged that treating patients with divine power was only a temporary measure, and she couldn't prevent new cases from arising. She attributed the emergence of these new cases to an infected source hidden somewhere within the slums. A glass tube positioned on her table drew her attention next. After examining the bodily fluid extracted from an infected individual, she recognized that it had a very short incubation period and it took a very long time for the infected person to die. Its malignancy caused the infected person to endure prolonged pain. Dolores understood that to completely stop the infection, she needed to focus and purify the deepest well. She envisioned the possibility of generating a drop by concentrating her divine power. A sudden wave of realization interrupted her thoughts, prompting her to exhale deeply. She rose from her seat and affirmed that this wasn't the time for her to lose herself in contemplation. She reminded herself that she should go and treat one more person. However, the next moment Dolores was struck by a sharp headache, causing her to falter. Clutching the edge of the table, she steadied herself, averting an untimely fall. Concern crept into her mind as she pondered over the possibility of anemia, wondering if it was a consequence of exerting too much divine power. Despite the physical strain, she gathered her strength, preparing to depart from the room with unwavering determination. With a steadfast resolve, she affirmed her commitment to alleviate the agonizing pain experienced by her patients as swiftly as possible. As Saintess Dollars emerged from her room, she was met by a group of 3 men who had evidently been attempting to win her favor. One of them joyously exclaimed her arrival, addressing her as Saintess and expressing their readiness to accompany her. Intrigued, Dollars inquired about their presence. One of the men eagerly responded, asserting that they had come to offer their assistance to her. Their voices resonated with a genuine desire to support her. They continued, expressing their concern for her well-being, emphasizing their inability to leave such a noble lady alone in a low and dirty place. The men proudly announced their gesture of bringing 3 wagons filled with donations and emergency relief, all the while humorously suggesting that the recipients had won the jackpot that day. However, an underlying mockery seeped into their words, raising questions about whether their excessive aid might undermine the slum dwellers' self-sufficiency. Amid their well-intentioned facade, Saintess Dollars discerned their true motives. She walked serenely past them as the trio declared their intentions to follow her, stating that it was a gentleman's duty to protect a lady. The men pledged their allegiance to her, suggesting that their actions had conveyed their true intent. With a gentle smile, Saintess assured them that she entrusted the task to their capable hands. Seeing this, their faces flushed with excitement, and their hearts skipped a beat in her presence. However, as time passed, the 3 nobles displayed expressions of disgust, struggling to contain their urge to vomit. The pungent smell of the camp, where the priests were tending to those afflicted with the epidemic, had overwhelmed them. They lamented the unpleasant odor and lamented the possibility of their expensive limited edition shoes being tarnished. One of them implored the priests to treat him first, while another fretted about the risk of becoming infected himself. The old noble demanded that the clutter be cleared immediately, expressing an urgent need to depart. Observing the noble's reactions, Saintess remained composed, foreseeing the inevitable outcome of their visit. She mused that it was blasphemous to approach a relief area with ulterior motives. She couldn't help but ponder whether they understood that empathy for the sick was the only essential requirement. For her, the embodiment of godly grace and love lay in absolute and pure altruism, in dogmatic sacrifice, in the voluntary spirit, in kindness, and in tenderness. Her gaze shifted toward another tent, emanating an ominous aura of dark energy. Anticipating the looming horrors within, she recognized that this was where the most critical patients were gathered. Among the sick and the clergy, everyone here would be in pain. Saintess moved toward the tent resolutely and silently sought forgiveness for not being present earlier. Bracing herself, she drew the curtain and declared her intentions to help since she was there now. However, she was met with a jolt of shock as a commanding voice pierced the air, urgently demanding the arrival of more saline. A priest stood in astonishment behind the doctor, witnessing the incredible scene unfolding before him. He found the doctor's method of treatment to be impossible, as according to his knowledge, only divine power should work on epidemic infections. He then marveled at the long hours the doctor had spent tending to these patients by himself. The doctor made a small incision in the infected area with his clinical knife, and then applied divine power by touching the wound with his 2 fingers. Miraculously, the wound immediately healed under his touch, and to the priest's amazement, the infection vanished as well. Contemplating the method employed by the doctor, the priest surmised that instead of merely blessing the skin, the doctor was enabling the direct flow of divine power into the infected area. This sparked a new possibility within the priest, making him realize that he, too, might be able to focus and utilize divine power in a similar manner. The saintess, closely observing the scene, recognized the doctor as the Night Hound, who was none other than Vikir in disguise. After curing the patient's infected area, Vikir administered some medicine to aid in the recovery. The saintess regarded him with awe, acknowledging his exceptional skill in both medicine and the use of divine power. With solemn determination, Vikir placed both his hands on the patient's chest and channeled divine power into the afflicted body. He knew that typically divine power was a cleric's prayer reaching a god, which God accepted and transformed into power for the cleric. The quantity of divine power bestowed upon an individual depended on their level of devotion to God, and the amount of divine power was directly proportional to the effort required to perform a miracle. 1 divine power equated to 1 miracle, while 10 divine powers could generate 10 miracles. However, Vikir knew of a method that allowed one to perform 10 miracles with 1 divine power, and 100 miracles with 10 divine powers. Vikir's thoughts delved into the turbulent past as he recalled the time of the fall when an overwhelming number of monsters assailed them, and the number of patients lying before the clerics had surpassed even the count of the monsters. The clerics had realized that the amount of divine power they possessed would not be enough to stop the disaster. The decision made by God, due to the desperation and faltering faith of the clerics, was to alter the equation used to perform miracles. The clerics now embraced a philosophy: take measures now and deal with the consequences later, perform miracles first, and address the aftermath afterward. It was a strange phenomenon where they could muster all the divine power they needed, even if the divine power they needed came with interest. People referred to this phenomenon as advanced divine power. Furthermore, it was a time when slaying monsters was deemed an act of faith. Therefore, even non-clerics could use advanced divine power by vanquishing monsters. Because of this, Vikir, who possessed a soul that had accumulated karmic energy from the past, was able to harness divine power within a divine region. Just then, a distressed little girl sat near her ailing mother and burst into tears, crying out for her mommy. Vikir, having completed the treatment of the previous patient, approached the little girl with gentle reassurance and promised to help her mother recover soon. He then handed her a gold coin and acknowledged that her mother was not only sick but also suffering from severe malnutrition. So he advised her to use the coin for food, firewood, and nursing her mother. The priest, who witnessed it all, intervened and mentioned that materialistic assistance was not permitted as monetary demands were endless. He expressed concern that if Vikir did that, he might end up giving all his money to them. In response, Vikir posed a philosophical query, probing the nature of endlessness and the concept of limitless demands. Perplexed, the priest struggled to comprehend the depth of his question. After hearing no response, Vikir continued and stated that there was a limit to how much money was in his pocket, so he could give all he had to the needy without repercussions. He paused for a moment as he gazed upon the sick mother, and then he apologized. Observing this exchange, Saintess Dolores wondered if he had just said he was sorry. She then questioned what he was sorry for and why he was apologizing, recalling Vikir's earlier statement about theology being an exploration of human understanding. She connected the dots, considering the possible reasons behind his apology. She wondered if his reason was perhaps the same as her own. because, like herself, he too felt remorse for not being able to treat more people. Suddenly, her heartbeat intensified and a loud thump escaped her chest. Saintess Dolores was merely a 16-year-old girl, young and inexperienced. However, at that moment, Dolores' heart started racing for the mysterious man standing before her. After attending to the victims of the epidemic, Vikir sat outside, exhausted. He let out a weary breath and lifted his mask momentarily to take a sip of water. His respite was short-lived as he noticed Saintess Dolores approaching. Acting quickly, he lowered his mask and inquired about her well-being. Saintess settled beside him and asked if she could have a moment to talk. Vikir granted her request, saying that he didn't mind. She expressed her gratitude for his assistance and acknowledged that they had managed to treat all the casualties with his help. Vikir modestly replied that he had merely done what was necessary. Saintess smiled and remarked that she knew he would say that. An awkward silence followed as they had nothing to talk about. Saintess broke the silence, clutching her clothes as she confessed her inner turmoil. She argued that a strong person like him should have been born with divine power. She then honestly mentioned how she had been fortunate to be born with divine power, but lamented the weakness of her body, mind, and faith. She questioned why God had chosen a weak person like her to be a saintess. She argued that there were so many other people who had strong faith even though they weren't born with divine power. Once again, she pondered why God had bestowed upon her the overwhelming title of a saintess. Vikir's response shocked her as he said that the very fact that she was in anguish and guilt was the reason why God had chosen her. A smile appeared on his face as he emphasized that what the world needed was a light that could penetrate even the darkest and most ferocious places. Tears welled up in Saintess Dolores' eyes as she sought reassurance, questioning whether she could become the person who could embody those words. Vikir's response was gentle yet firm, assuring her that she would indeed be able to fulfill that role. The outcome of gathering the Quo Vadis family's clergy in one area for prayer was that all processes involved in the creation of holy water were successful. The result was a divine essence that could purify all those infected within the slums with just one drop. 3 drops of the concentrated holy water were produced and carefully stored. The name given to these drops was Pliny de la Verge, also known as Saintess Tyr. Amid a grand hall, Saintess sat, facing a podium that held a box containing the 3 small empty glass bottles. Initiating her prayer, a radiant divine light began to swirl around the hall. Her voice resonated through the space as she chanted, drawing attention to the woman who had the unique privilege of nurturing God's only son. She spoke of the sleepless nights filled with anguish and her heart's inability to keep pace with the profound sorrow she experienced. She proclaimed the day as the most painful and sorrowful for her. As Saintess concluded her prayer, the divine light descended upon the podium, enveloping it in an ethereal glow. Sometime later, holy knights appeared before her, carrying a box containing the 3 Saintess tears. The holy knight closed the box, expressing gratitude for her efforts, and assured her that they would store it securely in the basement's safe. Saintess Dolores entrusted them with the task, and as they departed, she found herself contemplating her next course of action. A priest stood solemnly before a statue of the goddess, engaged in prayer. Meanwhile, Saintess approached him from behind, addressing him respectfully as father and indicating her intention to report something about the Red Death. The priest called her his fairy and his daughter and told her to come closer. Saintess humbly acknowledged the order and walked towards him. The priest, Cardinal of the Lune Church, Humbert Lun Quo Vadis, placed his hand on her shoulder and with a warm smile commended her for the generous offering she had made this time, recognizing that it was expected of his daughter. Saintess humbly accepted his praise and acknowledged his generosity. Cardinal implored her to share the details, and Saintess began by outlining their plan to utilize their newly created Saintess Tyr to cleanse the water flowing beneath Saint Mecca. In response, Cardinal inquired if she had found the source of the infection. Saintess confirmed this and mentioned that it originated from an unregistered well in the slums. She further added that children had testified that a spirit had cursed the well. According to their investigation, the well was severely infected, and they had also found a glass bottle that the criminal used to store and spread the infection. She then presented suspicious objects that were discovered during their investigation. Cardinal looked at the dagger and an emblem placed on the cloth, questioning where they had found these items. Saintess explained that they had discovered them near the well. Cardinal's gaze turned icy as he recognized the emblems of both Leviathan and Bourgeois engraved on the objects. This confirmed their collaboration in creating an artificial virus. A surge of aura engulfed him as he expressed his disdain for those who dared to insult divinity. His words echoed with righteous fury as he declared a holy war against these despicable poison addicts and misers. Saintess maintained her composure despite Cardinal's intense anger, but her demeanor shifted drastically when he mentioned the Night Hound and deemed him suspicious. In a commanding tone, Cardinal demanded that the Night Hound be captured immediately and forced to confess to every detail of his involvement. However, Saintess abruptly interjected, raising her voice to state that the Night Hound was innocent. Taken aback by her outburst, Cardinal regarded her with a questioning look. Saintess fervently argued that the Night Hound had devoted his efforts to treating the infected, emphasizing that his actions had prevented any casualties. She was resolute in her belief that he couldn't possibly be evil. Cardinal then acknowledged that he knew what was going on, but Saintess wore a confused look on her face after hearing this. Cardinal raised his hand toward the sky and remarked that it was all Night Hound's fault for his daughter, who had never gone against him, to utter those words to him. So he decided to personally interrogate him. Suddenly, an overwhelming pressure surged around him that caused Saintess to cry out. Soon, a radiant beam of light shot skyward from his hand. The beam trailed up in the sky and then illuminated the entire city in a brilliant divine aura. Cardinal, with an air of finality, declared to Saintess that it was meaningless for her to oppose him, as he had already dispatched the paladins to pursue the Night Hound. In an inn where Vikir had been staying for the past few days, a group of holy knights had gathered outside his room. Communicating through sign language, they strategized their next course of action. With determined resolve, one of the knights forcefully kicked open the door, accusing the Night Hound of being a suspect in the outbreak of the Red Death. However, their words hung in the air, echoing in the empty room as they stood there in shock, realizing that their target was not even there in the first place. Meanwhile, at the location of Saintess Dolores and Cardinal, a priest hurriedly approached them. His voice was filled with urgency as he mentioned that something bad had happened. Cardinal remained calm and questioned him about what had gone wrong. The priest hesitated for a moment and then delivered the distressing news that one of the Saintess tears had disappeared from the basement safe. A bead of sweat trickled down Saintess's face as she pondered if this was the reason Night Hound had come here. Unbeknownst to them, Vikir stood atop one of the city wall watchtowers. He looked down at the Saintess tear in his hand with a smile. After sealing the pouch, he whispered his thanks for this gift. A few moments later, the figure of Vikir standing on the watchtower dissolved into the shadows. Ayan found herself at the precipice of a cliff, bow in hand, facing the menacing presence of a Cerberus. The creature, adorned with arrows, growled ominously. A barbarian, situated behind the Cerberus, shouted in an attempt to divert its attention. But the beast pressed forward toward Ayan, causing her to retreat instinctively. As she stepped backward, the ground beneath her betrayed her, giving way. Losing her balance, she tumbled backward from the edge of the cliff. Plunging downward, she broke through the tree branches in her descent. None proved sufficient to halt her fall, and with a final impact, she landed on the ground below. As Ayan regained consciousness, she heard some voices, but she couldn't decipher their meaning. She struggled to open her eyes, and when she managed to do so, her gaze was met with the sight of two men standing before her. One observed her condition, while the other wore a greedy smile. It became evident that this duo belonged to a merchant group transporting supplies. The discovery of Ayan, injured and prone on the ground, had seemingly interrupted their journey. At an indeterminate time later, Ayan, visibly nervous, gripped a sword tightly in her hand. Behind her stood a confining wooden wall, offering no escape. A raucous crowd, masked and exuberant, cheered loudly, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. Facing Ayan was her opponent, a robust man adorned with battle scars, a sinister smile on his face as he menacingly clacked his fingers, signaling the imminent clash. The air buzzed with tension as the battle commenced, the man charging at her with a thunderous shout, exuding confidence in his imminent victory. Despite her fear, Ayan displayed agility, evading his attack with a swift jump and retaliating with a slash of her sword, leaving a small wound on his shoulder. To her dismay, her opponent, seemingly unfazed, seized her midair by the leg and hurled her forcefully towards the wooden barrier. Ayan collided with the unforgiving wall, blood spraying from her mouth as pain surged through her body, tears welling in her eyes. The observers, hidden behind their masks, erupted in boisterous laughter, finding intense pleasure in the unfolding spectacle of the brutal battle. Her struggle against her formidable adversary was now a source of cruel entertainment for the masked onlookers. Ayan lay on the ground, tears streaming down her face, defeated and broken. Her opponent reveled in his triumph, letting out a victorious shout that reverberated through the arena. In this moment of despair, the silhouette of her mother and family materialized before her, a glimmer of hope amid darkness. Summoning every ounce of strength, Ayan resolved to rise. As she struggled to stand, the attention of the observers shifted back to her. The sight of her defiance captured their interest, and murmurs about her future began to circulate among the onlookers. Finally, Ayan managed to stand, drawing lines on her face with soil covered in blood. Unafraid and fueled by an inner fire, she gazed ahead at her opponent. The arena crackled with anticipation as observers licked their lips, savoring the prospect of an intense battle about to unfold. Now standing tall, Ayan prepared to face her adversary once more, unwavering in her determination to defy the odds. The air buzzed with tension as the stage was set for the next chapter in this brutal spectacle. Some years had passed, and Ayan found herself imprisoned behind steel bars, her eyes reflecting a profound sense of hopelessness. Even the images of her family, once a source of strength, had blurred into a distant memory. Overwhelmed, she closed her eyes, surrendering to the crushing weight of despair. Amid this bleakness, a sudden noise jolted her back to awareness. As her eyes opened, she discovered a glass tube with remnants of elixir lying before her. She recoiled in shock, fear gripping her as she noticed a figure standing before her. This figure was none other than Vikir. He opened her cage door and, in the rough language of the barbarians, instructed her to go. Reality shifted abruptly, and Ayan awoke from this distressing dream with tears covering her eyes. The matriarch looked at her daughter lying on her lap and inquired if she had experienced a nightmare. She then told Ayan that she kept looking for Vikir in her sleep. But the dream was not the only torment haunting her. With a heavy breath and a voice laden with pain, she confided in her mother about the worsening agony. Her chest ached, her body burned, and the sensation that her heart had dried up enveloped her. In a voice weighed down by despair, she questioned if she was afflicted with the Red Death. The pain was so overwhelming that it caused her to regret being born into this world. The matriarch sought to comfort her, gently placing her hand on Ayan's and recounting a tale. A long time ago, she and Ayan's father buried a small seed in the ground. Ayan's father planted the seed, while she watered it every day. Not long after, the seed sprouted, and after several months, it became a healthy and beautiful flower. Subsequently, they harvested the flowers, extracted the sap, and smoked it. They experienced euphoria and had fun, and that was how Ayan came into this world. However, due to her father committing a misdeed, he faced execution at the hands of her grandfather. Ayan, grappling with her deteriorating health, expressed her distress. In response, the matriarch, with a gentle smile, reminded her of the unpredictability of life and the need to endure its challenges. She reassured Ayan, urging her to wait for Vikir's return, convinced that he would find a solution to treat the infection. However, Ayan, in her despondency, rejected the comfort, stating her belief that Vikir wouldn't come back. Just then, a sudden shout from outside shattered the somber atmosphere. The exclamation revealed that Vikir had returned, bringing with him the much-needed medicine. The matriarch's face brightened with a smile as she reassured Ayan, pointing to the truth she had foreseen. However, when she looked down to share her joy with her daughter, she found that Ayan had already bolted outside. The matriarch appeared a bit annoyed and couldn't help but question whether Ayan truly had the Red Death. Meanwhile, fueled by a mixture of desperation and hope, Ayan ran at full speed, her thoughts racing back to the time when Vikir had helped her escape a life of slavery. The moment she witnessed Vikir standing boldly against Madame Eight Legs, she realized that facing one's fears head-on was a powerful force. It was Vikir's example that gave her the strength to stand back up, transcending the depths of her own fears and pain. Finally, Ayan arrived in the midst of the gathered barbarians. Her eyes soon fell on Vikir, who stood before her. Vikir expressed surprise upon seeing her, as he had heard from the warriors that she had contracted the Red Death. However, Ayan didn't respond with words. Instead, propelled by a rush of emotions, she leaped at him with full force, enveloping him in a tight hug. The impact sent Vikir flying backward, crashing to the ground, but she held on to him steadfastly. Vikir questioned her actions, stating that her fervent hug might have broken his back if he hadn't used mana. He then questioned how she could have such force when she had Red Death. Ayan simply stated that as soon as she heard he had returned, her body felt lighter. Confused but relieved, he inquired about her well-being, and Ayan reassured him that she was fine. Vikir then asked if she was just pretending to be fine, to which she nodded in agreement. Ayan then smiled with genuine happiness and welcomed him back. Vikir reciprocated her sentiment, saying, "I'm back." In the confines of a tent, Ahul lay sick on a bed, her condition evidently grave. By her side sat Vikir, and a group of barbarians stood in the background, concerned expressions etched on their faces. Vikir, determined to aid Ahul, retrieved a pouch and began to open it. A brilliant golden radiance emanated from the pouch as he held up the saintess tear in his hand. The golden light cascaded onto Ahul, who was laboring under heavy breaths. To the surprise of everyone present, the red spots on her body started vanishing. The barbarians erupted in exclamations, marveling at the disappearance of Ahul's affliction. The potent light from Vikir's offering had seemingly eradicated the Red Death. Their awe was palpable as they acknowledged him as the bringer of the cure. Vikir inquired about the number of patients they had, and Ayan reported that, including Ahul, there were around 30. Vikir then asked about the situation of other tribes, and Ayan revealed that the situation was really bad. Many other tribes were on the brink of annihilation. Vikir estimated that there should be around 10,000 affected individuals, and he urged her to tell other tribes to gather the sick. Ayan, expressing concern and questioning if there were large quantities of the cure, Vikir assured her that there was an ample supply of the cure, and they could use this opportunity to showcase their capabilities to other tribes. Barbarians, overwhelmed by his deeds, exclaimed in admiration and hailed him as amazing. Vikir focused on practical matters and shifted his attention to another issue. He spoke of a swamp monster named Ka, disclosing that he had defeated it during his journey. Instructing the barbarians to retrieve the monster for sustenance, awe filled the air once again. The barbarians couldn't help but feel that Vikir was truly amazing, realizing they couldn't even compare to him. Vikir redirected attention to the immediate task at hand and urged the tribes to gather around the river catchment area, signaling the need for a swift response. After some time, the diverse barbarian tribes gathered near a river, with Vikir prominently positioned at the forefront. Holding the saintess tear, Vikir poured it into the river, and from the point of contact, a radiant wave of golden light emanated. Soon, this golden light flowed throughout the entire river, casting a resplendent glow that bathed the surrounding forest. Addressing the tribe leaders, Vikir revealed that all they needed to do was drink the water. The infected individuals, afflicted by the Red Death, began to partake, assisted by others when necessary. Laughter and joy echoed through the air as some marveled at the lightness they felt, while others exclaimed that the Red Death had disappeared, celebrating their newfound lease on life. Turning to the matriarch, Vikir explained that the purification process was extending from the catchment area, assuring her that the bacteria would soon vanish. The matriarch, impressed by his deeds, suggested appointing him as the tribe's shaman. Vikir, however, began to decline the offer when suddenly, the ground shook as someone slammed their foot down, causing a crack to appear. All eyes turned toward the source, revealing one of the tribe leaders. With a thunderous voice, he posed a question to the people of the deep forest. What's the name of the hero who purified the forest? In response, the barbarians responded with a rhythmic chant, pounding their feet on the ground and proclaiming Vikir's name. A member of the Balak tribe inquired about the person who saved their family, and the resounding response was Vikir's name. The leader of the third tribe then questioned who brought a bright tomorrow for the deep forest, and once again, the resounding reply was the chanting of Vikir's name. The atmosphere resonated with the acknowledgement and gratitude of the tribes. A chorus of voices united in acclaim for the individual who had brought healing and hope to their home. In the mind of Vikir, the actions of the deadly Poison clan had inadvertently turned into an advantageous situation. The Baskerville clan, known for their dominance over the La Rouge et La Noire mountain, were pioneers and conquerors, but they harbored a deep-seated rivalry with the natives of the mountain. Vikir, contemplating this, couldn't help but smile sinisterly. Winning over the mountain natives, thanks to the situation created by the Poison clan, seemed like an opportunity to deal a significant blow to the entire Baskerville clan, especially Hugo. Just as he was plotting his next moves, the matriarch announced the commencement of a festival. However, Vikir interjected, signaling that there was one more critical task at hand. Both the matriarch and Ian regarded him with questioning looks. Vikir clarified his intention, emphasizing the need to identify and locate the individual responsible for spreading poison in the forest. Meanwhile, in a dark cave, another man reveled in his sinister thoughts. He felt that a lot of time had passed, so everyone should have been infected by now. He blamed the Imperial brat for the current predicament, as he wouldn't have struck a deal with the Imperial druggies if not for him. However, soon he smirked, confident that by infecting everyone and later providing the antidote, he would become the revered savior of the tribe. Ahuman reveled in his devious plan, pleased with the idea of infecting his own granddaughter, Ahul, as a masterstroke of deception. Ahuman, having emerged from the cave and rejoined the village, was met with a disconcerting reality. The villagers were bustling with activity, working happily, contrary to his expectations. Confusion gripped him as he questioned how everyone appeared fine, despite his belief that they were on the brink of suffering due to the Red Death. He had seen them gasping for air just before he commenced the ancestral rite. His bewilderment deepened as he observed Ahul, his granddaughter, cheerfully cooking food. This sight contradicted his assumptions, leading him to wonder what was happening. Driven by disbelief, Ahuman rushed toward the river, hoping to find an explanation. As he reached the riverbank, he was confronted with a startling revelation. The water was remarkably clean, allowing him to see his reflection. This raised more questions. How are the fish in the river alive? Has the river been purified? And how has the water become even clearer? Despair etched across his face. Ahuman grappled with the inexplicable turn of events. Just as the weight of his realization settled in, Vikir materialized behind him, commenting casually on the river's clarity. Startled, Ahuman recoiled and, in frustration, referred to him as an imperial bastard. Internally, he wondered when Vikir had arrived. But his shock was further intensified when he discovered that Vikir wasn't alone. A group of barbarians accompanied him. Vikir looked at Ahuman and realized that, as he had suspected, he was the culprit behind the spread of the Red Death in the forest. He then recalled that before his regression, there was a time when stories of an old man in the forest and his misdeeds were circulating. It was a horrible story of a man who had spread an infection within his tribe due to his desire to become a hero. However, in the end, he failed to cure it and ended up causing the death of most of his tribespeople. Meanwhile, Ahuman's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. He refused to believe that Vikir could be aware of his devious plans. He tried to divert attention and address the gathering sarcastically, asking if everyone had come to greet the old shaman. The matriarch, however, stepped forward, questioning him about the completion of the ceremony. With feigned confidence, Ahuman asserted that the infection would soon disappear. The matriarch shared information about a war in the empire caused by the Red Death. The primary reason for this conflict was the discovery that the infection had been artificially created and deliberately spread. However, she found the whole situation perplexing, as there wasn't any connection between the imperial clan and the deep forest, so this infection should not have spread in the deep forest. Ahuman, with a hesitant voice, claimed ignorance, stating that he had only come after performing the rite for the tribe's recovery. Noticing Ahuman's evasive responses, the matriarch questioned why he had come to the catchment area instead of the village. Her gaze shifted to Vikir, acknowledging that Ahuman had indeed arrived in the catchment area, thus validating his earlier statement. However, Ahuman didn't understand what both of them were talking about. The matriarch then turned back to Ahuman and said to Vikir that they should now see if whatever he had said next was also correct or not. Ahuman, now sweating profusely, couldn't help but nervously ask her about what they were talking about. The matriarch recalled Vikir's earlier assertion that Ahuman intended to use this incident to become the tribe's hero, ensuring he would definitively have the Red Death cure on him. Suddenly, a chilling aura emanated from the matriarch, causing Ahuman to tense up. She then demanded to see what was in his pouch. Vikir's mind revisited a conversation he had with Ayan some time ago, seeking insights into Ahuman's past. Ayan began unraveling the enigma of Ahuman's origins. Ahuman wasn't a native Balak. His birth and background were shrouded in mystery. Long ago, he had arrived as a slave under the dominion of the existing shaman. However, destiny took a dramatic turn when he killed the shaman plotting a coup d'etat and stole his sorcerer powers. Due to his contribution in thwarting the coup, he was elevated from a slave to a shaman. Subsequently, in order to assimilate into the Balak community, he undertook various tasks, including the unpleasant duty of cleaning up excrement. He bore the responsibility for all menial tasks within the village and even served as bait for dangerous prey during hunts. It was only as he aged, his hair turning gray, that he finally gained acknowledgement and respect within the society. In the present, as Vikir observed Ahuman, he pondered whether the aging shaman desired the privileges he had been denied in his youth. He suspected that Ahuman had overstepped the matriarch's authority in an attempt to seize control of the entire forest. The matriarch, her expression filled with anger, confronted Ahuman, demanding to see his pouch. Ahuman, visibly shaken, explained that the pouch contained flour he had saved to consume after a ceremony. As he attempted to retrieve the pouch, a mishap occurred. The pouch slipped from his grasp and tumbled into the river. Soon, the contents dissolved into the water. Ahuman, in shock, exclaimed that the old man had hand tremors, which resulted in the accidental loss of the pouch in the river. Simultaneously, the matriarch acknowledged Vikir's earlier suspicions, expressing disbelief that he would throw the pouch into the river. Vikir remarked that now they could no longer reveal the content of his pouch using the same method. Ahuman, in a fit of anger, denied having an antidote and stated that accusing him implied he was the one who had spread poison throughout the forest. He pointed an accusatory finger at Vikir, urging the matriarch to punish him for framing the honorable shaman. The matriarch agreed with his statement that you cannot frame someone without evidence. Since he believed he was innocent, she promised to protect his honor and pride. Ahuman smirked, confident that without evidence, even the matriarch would not be able to punish him. He felt untouchable. However, his confidence waned when the matriarch ordered an Iliad. An Iliad was a Balak tradition that served as a resolution for conflicts when opinions couldn't align. The victor of the Iliad was deemed competent, and the loser faced the consequences of incompetence. Ahun addressed Ahuman as grandfather and remarked that he had always emphasized the importance of tradition. The Iliad was also a tradition of Balak's, so Ahun asked him to demonstrate how to protect their traditions. Ahuman cursed him internally, but he reluctantly agreed, scheduling the Iliad for 4 days from now, during the night of the full moon. Vikir, however, challenged the time frame, asserting that tradition dictated that the recipient of the Iliad request determine the day. He then revealed his cunning plan, admitting that evidence and verification were meaningless. Cornering him into a situation where he had no choice but to request an Iliad was all part of his plan. Vikir smiled slyly and suggested initiating the Iliad immediately. Near the summit of the mountain, the Balak tribe gathered to witness the Iliad. The matriarch, presiding over the proceedings, declared the commencement of the Iliad within the warriors' circle, warning that those attempting to flee would face merciless execution by the warriors. Behind her was the warriors' mountain, housing the graves of ancestors, and since their ancestors were watching, any indecency would not be forgiven. She invoked the ancestors' judgment to decide the victor, urging the Balak warriors to prove their righteousness. Ayan, with a smile on her face, shouted encouragement to Vikir, requesting him to secure victory with a single attack. The sentiment was echoed by other members of the tribe, chanting his name. Meanwhile, Ahuman, frustrated by the apparent lack of support, bit his finger, letting a few drops of blood fall to the ground. He believed that everyone would stop chanting his name once he won, as weapons weren't the only things one could use in an Iliad. Soon, 3 skeletons emerged from the ground, and Ahuman ordered them to watch his blind spots and notify him of Vikir's movements. Armed with a bow and arrow, Ahuman smirked, confident that it was impossible for Vikir, who had only been here for 2 years, to beat someone like him, who had spent 7 years in the forest. There was no way Vikir could be more familiar with the terrain. All he needed to do was wait for Vikir to show himself, and he would shoot an arrow right through him. Unbeknownst to him, Vikir had already arrived and was hanging upside down from a tree branch behind him. Vikir pondered the utility of the silent heal skill acquired from killing the master of the swamp. It was a Mashasu skill that allowed him to silently target his prey's openings. He appreciated its ability to eliminate distracting sounds, making it particularly useful for assassins. Observing Ahuman's use of necromancy, he speculated on the possibility of him originating from Lakoko, a tribe of shamans. However, such details held little consequence for his overall strategy. With calculated precision, Vikir descended from the tree amidst the skeletons. His hand moved at an astonishing speed, leaving red slashes in its wake as the skeletons crumbled to pieces. Unaware of this swift action, Ahuman maintained a smirk, believing that Vikir was paralyzed by fear. However, in an instant, Vikir materialized behind Ahuman, thrusting Beelzebub into his chest. Ahuman, bewildered and coughing, questioned the sudden turn of events. He hadn't even heard any footsteps on the fallen leaves. With a push, Vikir sent him sprawling to the ground, his eyes vacant. Retracting Beelzebub, Vikir stood victorious. Ayan rushed towards him, elated by the outcome. The surrounding barbarians, shocked by the swiftness of the confrontation, acknowledged the instant decision. One noted that the ancestors had deemed Ahuman's words unworthy of consideration. The Iliad had reached its swift and definitive conclusion, leaving the mountain's summit in a stunned silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. Ahuman, writhing in pain on the ground, struggled with the burning sensation of his wound. Fearful of death, memories of enduring a shameful past to survive within the Balaks flooded his thoughts. Unfairness overwhelmed him as he looked at Vikir, nursing a deep resentment for the things he believed were rightfully his. The Balak tribe, Lakoko, everyone who had scorned him seemed to bear the blame in his anguished perspective. Vikir, contemplating the ongoing suffering, turned to Ahun, suggesting that ending Ahuman's pain might be a merciful option. However, Ahun refused to deliver the mercy since he had almost lost Ahul because of the Red Death. Even though Ahuman was his grandfather, he could not forgive him and stated that a coward deserved to be in pain and wasn't worth pitying. Unbeknownst to everyone, Ahuman, at death's door, was drawing something on the ground with his own blood. As he neared completion, a purple aura emanated from the ancestor's grave, and the coffin's door creaked open. Simultaneously, the sky and ground were enveloped in a dark and eerie purple energy, catching the attention of everyone present. The sudden change in atmosphere raised alarm among the witnesses. They questioned the ominous energy emanating from the grave, with Ahun, in particular, displaying shock on his face as he observed his grandfather's cryptic actions. Vikir, registering the shock on Ahun's face, turned to see Ahuman on the ground. He was surprised to witness him moving, considering that he had surely stabbed his lungs. Barbarians nearby expressed their anger at Ahuman, accusing him of meddling with the grave and risking the wrath of the ancestors. Ahuman, now with purple eyes and an ominous aura, laughed and questioned whether he should truly be the one to fear the ancestors. Sensing something amiss, Vikir sprinted towards Ahuman, urgently shouting that they needed to kill him immediately. Just as Vikir reached him, an explosion occurred, pushing him back. With a worried expression, Vikir questioned himself if he was too late. Ayan, who arrived behind him, was shocked to see the source of the blast, an arrow covered in dark energy. Ahuman gazed towards a figure on the mountain and declared that, since they wished to defer the decision to the ancestors, it was now time for the great ancestors' judgment. Atop the mountain stood an undead woman wielding a bow. The message unveiled her identity as the Death Knight, with a risk rating ranging from A to S. The Death Knight was an existence that had reached the peak of their lives, but had been corrupted and transformed. They use one's soul and physical body to gather dark mana within their muscles and veins until it overflows. Ayan's eyes widened in shock as she gazed upon the Death Knight, questioning if she really was their ancestor. Meanwhile, Vikir observed Ahuman's actions and contemplated the impossibility of the situation. Resurrection sorcery on a Balak ancestor. It seemed beyond the capabilities of a shaman like Ahuman. His thoughts delved further, considering the unthinkable. Had he transformed himself into an undead being? Ahuman summoned skeletons and questioned whether they truly believed he was a shaman living among the Balaks without any countermeasures. He then revealed that it was too early to be surprised, as there wasn't only one grave here on Warriors Mountain. Soon, numerous Death Knights started appearing, and Ahuman began to run away in his skeleton carriage while mockingly telling them to do their best in the fight against their ancestors. Ahun arrived behind him and questioned how low he was willing to go. He was about to fire an arrow at his grandfather when another arrow shattered his own. Ahun turned towards the source, discovering it was the Balak ancestor who had intervened. Suddenly, an arrow streaked from the forest, obliterating the undead ancestor's head. The matriarch, after defeating the undead, commanded everyone to prepare for battle. She enlightened the group that the figures in front of them were merely Ahuman's puppets, so she urged them to kill the undead ancestors without any hesitation and prioritize survival. The gruesome battle between the Balak tribe and their undead ancestors raged on, but the situation appeared dire for the Balaks. They suffered rapid casualties against their formidable ancestors, whose strength seemed insurmountable. Amidst the chaos, an undead let out a scream, only to have her head blasted off by a precise arrow. Two more undead met a similar fate, their heads lost to the deadly accuracy of arrows. Vikir observed the matriarch using one arrow per Death Knight. She skillfully dispatched Death Knights who were on par with a high-ranked graduator, showcasing the formidable strength of the Night Fox, Aquila. It dawned on him that the rumors about her protecting the forests from the Empire weren't unfounded. Turning to Ayan, Vikir expressed confidence that there wouldn't be any problem with the matriarch present. He urged Ayan to follow him. When questioned about their destination, he clarified that their objective was Ahuman. Meanwhile, Ahuman retreated from the battlefield and laughed, certain that the Balaks would regret kicking him out. Suddenly, he looked at a skeleton and instructed it to handle a task. He then continued on his way, lost in thought. He acknowledged that, even though he had resurrected the ancestors, as long as Aquila was there, he couldn't act carelessly. After all, she was a genius who had been the strongest village head in history. A smirk appeared on his face as a devious plan formulated in his mind. Despite Aquila's brilliance, he believed she wouldn't be able to handle what he had in store. In their pursuit, Vikir and Ayan discovered Ahuman's location, where he sat in the middle of a magic circle, chanting something mysterious. Vikir, perplexed by the choice of location, questioned Ayan about the significance of the place with the pillars. Ayan didn't know much, but she was certain that they couldn't allow Ahuman to continue his suspicious activities. She took aim with an arrow infused with aura and declared her intent to kill Ahuman. The arrow soared toward its target, but before it could strike, Ahuman shouted, "I'm done." In a surprising twist, a hand emerged from the ground, catching the arrow between its fingers. Ahuman jubilantly announced his success in summoning it. According to legend, he slept alone deep within the forest, and he was the only one who had noticed him. He then welcomed his newly summoned ally, the divine archer Adonai. Ayan was in utter shock and couldn't believe that the undead in front of her was Adonai. Vikir, too, was astonished, contemplating the implications of summoning Adonai, the legendary archer of the Balax. However, their surprise was cut short when Adonai fired an arrow at them. Vikir, quick on his feet, summoned Beelzebub and managed to alter the arrow's trajectory. Yet, when the arrow struck a tree, it triggered a massive explosion, leaving him shocked by the unexpected aftermath. Vikir's mind raced as he realized that it was an arrow created with aura, and even though he had deflected the damage it caused, it left him astonished. However, his concern shifted swiftly when he heard Ayan's pained voice. There was a cut on Ayan's thigh, and she expressed her pain by revealing that it felt like her leg was burning. Vikir suspected it might be poison, possibly from Adonai's arrow. Thoughts rushed through his mind, and he realized that the legend about Adonai dealing with that monster was true. He also realized that the bow Adonai was currently using was made from the remains of Madame Eight Legs. Before Vikir could fully process this revelation, Adonai launched a relentless barrage of aura arrows at them. Vikir, utilizing Beelzebub, deflected the arrows, and each deflection caused massive explosions wherever they landed. When the onslaught finally ceased, the ground lay split and scarred, but Vikir stood, albeit in a weakened state, shielding Ayan. Even Beelzebub seemed strained, emitting painful sounds. Ayan noticed his fatigue and expressed concern. She told him to stop protecting her, run away, and leave her. Ahuman's laughter echoed through the battleground as he reveled in his perceived triumph. His disdain for Vikir and Ayan was palpable, and with a sinister voice, he urged Adonai to end their lives. Adonai responded, firing an arrow that carried with it the aura of death, threatening to extinguish the lives of Vikir and Ayan. Vikir braced himself, preparing to block the impending arrow. However, a sudden twist of fate intervened. Before the deadly projectile could reach its targets, a mysterious figure appeared, catching the arrow with bare hands. Ahuman, Vikir, and Ayan were all struck dumb by this unforeseen turn of events. Matriarch Aquila emerged from the shadows, holding the arrow in her hand. With a display of formidable strength, she squeezed the arrow, dissipating the deadly aura. Ahuman felt a chill running down his spine as Matriarch Aquila locked eyes with him and said, "Let's